Well, it's hugely important that people understand that the Freedom of Information Act will allow them access to all manner of government information. This is a step change in the approach to ownership of information, which is in the control of the government. So in the old days, government information was always considered to be private, confidential, and not accessible to the citizen. The modern view, the view to which my government subscribes, is that the information that we hold for citizens, and therefore citizens should be entitled to have access to it unless it is sensitive in the context, for example, of an issue that might be live in the courts, or an issue that may affect Gibraltar's international standing, in particular in our case, of course, with Spain. So that is the change in the approach.
In tangible terms, what sort of information will people have access to?
Well, it's impossible to actually pinpoint what information you can have access to, because there is so much different information in the hands of the government. Better to look at what it is you might not be able to access, because that should be the smaller list, the shorter list. Now, we've learned the lessons of how implementation of freedom of information legislation has happened across other European nations. What we want to do is to make sure that we are ready to deliver on the requests for information that come in. So in the context of the bill, you will see that the schedule of which departments the bill applies to is going to be blank, because we're going to be adding to it as we go. And the model that has been most helpful in other European states is that you roll out freedom of information on a department-by-department basis, so that you actually create a small team that are ready to deal with any information requests that come in, because at the beginning of the process of opening up government and opening up the windows and doors of government information, of access to government information, you get a lot of requests. So you have to be ready to roll out slowly, otherwise you could just bring the government to a grinding halt with the number of information requests received.
Well, that was going to be my next question. In fact, won't this lead to an increased workload for civil servants?
Well, if you look at the way that it has happened in other states, where freedom of information is now, legislation has now settled down, there's been a blip at the beginning, but really only a blip. And departments have been able to deal with requests as they come in, other than the initial amount of requests. That's why we stage the way that departments are exposed to the application of the legislation. We should have absolutely no difficulty with that. But this is a huge step forward for people in their ability to access information. We already changed the rules as to when information became public after a period of time. When we were first elected, we said in our manifesto that the 30-year rule will become a 20-year rule. Now we're moving even towards the present, so that somebody can write in and ask for information about yesterday or the day before yesterday, and unless there's a good reason why they shouldn't have it, they will be able to have that information.
Okay, and what is the if you like, the timetable for this? You're publishing the command paper today. By when would you expect the bill to be enacted?
I would certainly hope that the bill will be in place before the summer, so that the legislation is bedding in long before the end of the calendar year.
And just out of interest, how does the government actually decide which bills you make the subject of a command paper and which you don't?
Well, what we've tried to do, remember that we also introduced the concept of the command paper, is that something which is completely new goes to a command paper, so that the general public has longer than the 6-week period which a normal bill gives them to provide feedback to the government. A command paper goes out, something that is not yet a bill. It's a draft bill, in effect, and you have the opportunity of giving more feedback. But look, in the context of what is happening here, if you look at how Gibraltar has changed in the past 3 years, Stephen, you as a journalist more than most will realize the massive step forward in opening up government and opening up democracy. Every month, a meeting of the Parliament, an opportunity for the opposition to question the government. Every quarter I go on television and I answer questions unscripted from members of the public or editors of our local newspapers. The leader of the opposition is now following that process and lending himself, although they never used to when they were in government, to that process by exercising a right of reply, by having an opposition question slot. All of that makes us have moved from one of the countries with probably the least amount of opportunity for questioning government. We used to have 3 meetings of Parliament a year, very few debates between Mr. Osana and Mr. Carvana when Mr. Carvana was Chief Minister, to probably one of the states that has the greatest standards of openness and transparency and democracy in the European Union and probably the world.